Yeah. Yeah, I put that unit down for delivery sometime last week. I don't know why it's saying that on the system. Someone else must have messed it up. Look, I've got someone at the front desk. We'll get this fixed later. Hey, I remember you. You've been visiting a lot lately. Patient 1079, right? I don't know why you keep coming back to see him, of all people, but who am I to judge? Alright, let's go. I'll walk you over. Not to bore you with the rules, I'm sure you've heard them plenty, but keep in mind the delicate state that he's in. Don't give him any food, don't promise you'll come back to see him, don't give him any sharp objects, and especially don't mention chivalry, warlord, or Asmongold around him. He's been on a streak of good behavior recently, and I don't want a repeat of the last incident. We're still cleaning the bloodstains out. Alright, this is it. Hey Mike, open it up!
Сука, блядь!
Hello dear viewer, it's great to see how deeply you've missed my presence. Don't worry, this cell can't contain me. Today's topic, the mighty continent of Europe. This sizable landmass was one of the first locales to debut sentient human life, and consequently, soon led to the scourge that is modern civilization. Is it any wonder that the topic of the last video was only made possible by a cohort of assorted European ne'er-do-wellers who have eclipsed the possibility for community on a multiplayer video game in a shroud of their unwashed odor? Part of the psychic damage I sustained in the first 6 months of 2024, oscillating from coverage of doomed robot lesbians to definitive proof that the human race is condemned to failure, is acknowledging that I share a continent with such uncouth rapscallions. Problem being, I actually like being here, sandwiched between a fascist precursor to a militant theocratic dictatorship so sworn to the art of war that educational facilities double as impromptu rifle ranges, and the unending inferno that is a stalemate between ultranationalist white supremacists and imperialist conscripts in Eastern Europe, make the trade-off of being British more morally acceptable. Besides, the pretentious voice that gets me mocked in every online lobby, and being unable to resemble any other skin tone than a radiant, blinding white that makes me purpose fit to double as a lighthouse beacon, being a resident of London isn't all that bad. If you can reckon with the potency of your loathing towards your own people for their poor palate and ridiculous names, as well as contend of the prospect of a QTE segment against knife-wielding ruffians late at night, dare I say it, life in England may be rather prosperous. Often, however, it was during the last 3 months of psychological recovery I reckoned with peculiar hypotheticals, as I would sit at my desk, oogling at fictitious women,
Holy moly.
whilst pummeling my member for my own failures in seeking intimacy of the opposite sex. I contemplated our societal standing. Has the rapid proliferation of technology and its convenience brought us forward as a civilization? Or has it disillusioned us, and really, the fabric of our society is as crude and tarnished as it was during the days of our primitive and violent medieval existence? In this moment of uncertainty, a game presented itself. What if you were a drunkard, depressed and lonely European man in 15th century Slovakia, wrongly trusted with a sword and plate mail? This is the question Felvidek touts about the nature of the European affliction. Felvidek is an RPG Maker JRPG in which you play as Pavol, a wayfaring knight stumbling through his days in a drunken stupor when the Ottomans and Hussites invade the realm of Felvidek, paired up with local holy man called
You are looking at Julian's pronunciation guide, where we look at how to pronounce better some of the most mispronounced words in the world. Name pronunciation, Matei.
Okay, there you go. Paired up with a local holy man called Matei, you rush off to thwart the invaders and uncover a plot to channel the forbidden demonic power of unknown gods. It's a short, light-hearted escapade of turn-based brawls that's netted itself a very positive and well-deserved reception on Steam. As someone who played through the whole game, I can attest that I myself feel Felvidek was an overall positive experience. I seriously congratulate those who worked on Felvidek for making something so short that simultaneously captivated online attention for a set window. We can both agree it's not lethal company levels of virality, but, as I've learned through the years, attaining any relevance at all online is a feat in of itself. With all of this being said, however, I think Felvidek isn't perfect. While I stepped away feeling overall satisfied with the game and agree with a positive consensus on it, I struggle to see how many online pundits regard it as remarkable when, I think, even making considerations for the small scope of a project, that there is much room for improvement. Aspects of the game across many fronts of creative design feel as if they are prototypes of what could have been brought to greater fruition in the final product. To dip my toes back into this channel, this short video essay will serve as the means of which to not just acclimate myself to my regularly scheduled bullshit, but to also explain my reservations about this title. So, sit back, clash steel against the foul Hussites, and cling to the fleeting warmth of love long past, because I'm about to explain why Felvidek could have been a lot better. There are a few reasons as to why I believe Felvidek could have been a lot better that span its artistic presentation and gameplay, but they do not come with equal weight. For that reason, it would be best to address the meagre morsels of critique before focusing upon the most egregious flaw of its play. One of these pertains to what you spend most of the time looking through: dialogue. In this era of media as an industry, profit is everything and can be succinctly described as heat-seeking. I hear you rolling your eyes already. Oh boy, Smug is going to talk about how bad the industry is again and rant about the nature of commercial products being at odds with creative art. Boo-hoo, slashes car tires and fire missiles at his dogs. I don't dredge this up to go down this road again. The conclusion of the Signalis video will forever remain my definitive perspective on creative art as a whole, so there really is no need to iterate upon it again. However, I cite this because I want to state that I admire Felvidek's bold creative decisions here. Where other games may have erred on the side of caution and written dialogue using more fanciful modern language, Felvidek's characters speak in 15th century English, making use of antiquated terms such as prithee and hark, and a menagerie of words that even my pretentious lexicon gets self-conscious being around. In a world where the average person's reading literacy has plummeted at the hands of big media, brains smoothed into marbles by the inexhaustible libraries of online slop that pervade popular media platforms and compel people towards the insanity that is the Kick streaming platform, this is a choice antithetical to success. It makes it distinct, contributes to an aberrant identity that distinguishes the title from its counterparts. The team behind Felvidek thought that it was only appropriate to have the game presented in this manner, and, without it, Felvidek would suffer. You only retain this part if you care about the little things, and that's emblematic of creators that made the game with something more than a cynical desire for material gain. I respect that a lot, seriously. However, distinction does not necessarily equate to quality, in the same way Aiden Ross is distinct through an addiction to sniffing the seats of sex traffickers. At the risk of sounding like a feeble toddler with an inability to process language, I think the choice to write the dialogue in this way made the game feel a little inaccessible. Reading the exchanges aloud became so tiring that I would stop for large parts because I felt little of it was actually that important. Often exchanges between the two mainstays of your party, Pavol and Matej, I would ignore because while I got the overall gist of what they were saying, the poignance of their conversations was blunted by the language barrier. I am a sucker for writing dialogue, and I believe one of the best ways to differentiate characters without directly stating it is the manner of which they speak, their eloquence, the length of their sentences, how often they stumble over their words, and the manner of which they share banter with comrades and colleagues alike. Dialogue isn't just a way for characters to share information with one another, but also a method of which to endear them to the audience. So it dismays me that because of this choice, every single face felt as if they spoke exactly the same. The narrative presence and silhouette of our friend Joseph, a castle lord, was indistinguishable from that of a random gong collector out in the local town. This then leads on to the next point. Despite Pavol and Matej being around for the entirety of the game, I felt little to no attachment to them nor their budding bromance. I can discern that they start out not really taking to one another and by the end of the game are closer to being friends, but other than that, I felt there were few character moments that endeared them to me. Even the part where they swap clothes and Pavol pretends to be a holier-than-thou priest while Matej pretends to be the drunkard knight fell flat for me. And this section was ripe with comedic potential. If the language implemented had been more reminiscent of a modern English tongue, these instances of their relationship developing would have been tangible in more than the simplicity of the broad strokes. This could have been a really entertaining buddy cop dynamic achieved in a 15th century setting, something distinct for more positive reasons. And not only is their interpersonal relationship lacking, but also the plot of the story it takes place within. Felvidek, as a narrative, starts out with you fending off a Hussite invasion, and soon revealing the underlying machinations of a secret plot to harness the power of an otherworldly entity known as Ahriman, a god beheld by the followers of the Zervanist cult. Marek, the antagonist, acts as the head of the operation, and has connections in the Middle East to harvest and distribute purple beans known as quaha, a word for coffee, that transforms those who consume it into horrible monsters. Spreading their influence puts greater power into Ahriman, who Marek wishes to harness and use as a means of obtaining immortality. Pavol clues in that things are awry when a woman known as Paula, his ex-wife, is eventually revealed to be serving as a high-ranking socialite of the cult that poisons a guardsman with quaha that turns him into a monster. Much of his personal struggle throughout the story is reckoning with the fate of his relationship with Paula. An apt pseudonym for this game, thusly, would be Felvidek, a 15th century retelling of Sneako's plight. While the existence of this conspiracy adds a dimension to the story and provides a mystery to involve the player in uncovering, it's hardly anything more than a serviceable string of events that give context as to why Pavol and associates are doing the things they're doing and killing the people they're killing. Perhaps if I was better able to understand what was being said, greater impact could be conveyed. The conversation with the Turk at the inn reveals a lot, but because I feel like I'm reading one of Shakespeare's first drafts for 4 hours, important story beats blur together, and the significance of scenes like fighting Ahriman himself become especially lost on me when the music that plays is tonally dissonant with what I'm doing.
Turn to the place of my origins. Pavol, release me. I'm gonna listen. Like, again, I'm tempering my expectations, but could they not have picked like something a little more menacing? I feel like I'm just hitting up my local drug dealer with this music. Like, we then turn up and kill him, and the music, again, it just sounds like I'm visiting a drug dealer.
The story for Felvidek didn't need to be groundbreaking. The scope of the game demands only a decent story, and I think what is provided gives enough mileage to the player to keep them going, despite it being a little lackluster. It gives you a motivation, at the very least, that is understandable as to why Pavol is going from A to B. But even with considerations given for how the language serves as a barrier to comprehension, I think generally the fundamental story isn't that great, and a lot of it can be attributed to what feels like a rush at the end. After Pavol gets shanked by Paula in the bar towards the game's end, he has a random vision of a demon, and then suddenly an angel comes to save him and a flaming sword appears and he's no longer bleeding to death. I can't even describe this as a plot contrivance, because the game doesn't ever attempt to even explain why he was worthy of saving, not that an explanation would make it any easier to take seriously, or any less obvious that the writer didn't know how to escape the corner Pavol getting stabbed had written them into. Better yet, considering the impossibility of this scenario, you'd think that maybe Pavol's worldview would take something close to a dramatic shift. Would the presence of Heaven's servant not inherently be a confirmation of the existence of a god, and therefore heaven? Soy-jacking at the thought of eternal salvation in the clouds is a realistic human reaction, dare I say it, one that is necessary to the mortal coil. You go to fight Ahriman, and even though the physical manifestation of a powerful demon is before them, hardly anyone bats an eye. In an era of religious fundamentalism and no standard education with any mention of science anywhere, you're telling me a bunch of devout Catholic Europeans see what can be likened to funky Satan and didn't immediately lose their minds. And with how fast the story accelerates to its tepid conclusion, the reveal that the final zone involved the party wading into the innards of a living entity comes off much weaker than I wish it would. Darkest Dungeon comprises so much of my creative inspiration. I am the prime player for this type of story, and this brand of cosmic horror feels so underutilized, even as one of the most pivotal aspects of Felvidek. All of this culminates in an ending that, with respect, made me wince a little. Sure, Pavol has learned forgiveness and spares Paula from the wrath of the angered townspeople as a sign that he has grown as a person, but I don't think there is much of a significant and satisfying story reason to spare her. Her involvement in the cult of Zervan contributed to the slaughter of multiple people, including Pavol at one point. and we have little to no opportunity to actually come to like her or empathize with her. Without her perspective, she is just an accessory to a violent power grab. Forgive me for being crass, but my tear ducts are as dry as any woman that lays her eyes on me. These aspects of Felvidek leave much to be desired, but as I have iterated in prior videos, the weight of these critiques comes down to what a game is trying to be. Soma is a game that wishes to tell a compelling transhumanist narrative that explores the significance of our mortal bodies and their relevance to human identity. Even though much of the game is a walking simulator, especially for those who disabled enemies attacking you, that doesn't matter. You are gripped by the woven tale. Trepang 2 is a slice of raw run-and-gun action that's all about the intensity of swift movement and tremendous gun power. Even though the story doesn't really push the envelope, that matters little. You are having a blast gunning down waves of enemies, that's the point. So when it comes to Felvidek, even if the choices for how the story is told unite into a less than stellar final performance, this can surely be mitigated by how fun it is to play. If the many fights that intercede for development of the story are satisfying, interesting, and exciting to partake in, then the reservations of the espoused tale can be rendered almost trivial. Perhaps. Unfortunately, Felvidek's biggest flaw is not concerned with narrative missteps. Often when people talk of the most exhilarating games they have played, turn-based RPGs don't have much of a running in that conversation. The reason is rather obvious. Something like Helldivers 2, games with a wealth of gunfire and explosions and viscera, offer greater volume of the carnage and chaos that are synonymous with that adrenaline surge of fun. Part of this attraction is the high tempo of the engagements, everything moving at the same time.
Save me, my friend, save me. Oh, I can't shoot much. I have to try and stay on top. This is insane. This is insane!
Turn-based games, understandably, are then thought to channel only a fraction of these volatile antics. A core gameplay style that has chess as its close ancestor does little to excite the mind. But I disagree somewhat with this belief, for two reasons. One, turn-based games, while not as bombastic or high-tempo as fellow titles, can still summon an adrenaline surge of similar intensity. When you play something like Darkest Dungeon and the very lives of characters you care about hang in the balance with every mission and quest, it takes only one miscalculation to hurt you both logistically and emotionally. There's a tension there that makes failure so terrifying that victory is the only manner of recourse that it can be avoided.
What is this? Are you serious? He's dead. He's dead. He's dead. He's dead. Ah!
The more specific dynamics of this are explored in my Darkest Dungeon video, but, take it from me, there is a reason as to why I haven't touched this accursed bastard since 2023. Booting it up gives Chris Barassa another opportunity to triangulate my location, and, upon doing so, a brick is thrown through my window with a note depicting a nondescript man having intercourse with my mother, annotated by the phrase, "couldn't beat the game without mods, lol." It is truly too much for the human mind to bear. But turn-based games are fun for more than just the looming consequences of failure. Look at titles like Lisa the Painful, Amori, Dragon's Quest, Super Lesbian Animal RPG, Fear and Hunger. Why is it that a party of 4 characters is such a tenured trope of game design for RPGs? The reason is simple, and pertains specifically to combat, the main form of gameplay. A party of 4 characters adds enough dimension to make it interesting for a prospective player, because it lets you micromanage the stat lines of individual characters without having too many people to look at, but it becomes overwhelming to do so. In some of these games, like Lisa the Painful and Dragon's Quest, you are given the opportunity to mix and match different characters of different combat disciplines. These alternative compositions make the game interesting, especially in the former because they're accompanied with the ever-looming shadow of permadeath, where it's possible to lose someone valuable to you and your squad. But it doesn't stop here. In a game like Amori, where you can only have access to 4 fixed characters, each of them plays a distinct role that adds a different dimension to the combat. The abilities of Hero, Kel, Audrey and Sunny differ vastly from one another, and it's the differing weight of their contributions for certain scenarios that arise, such as needing to heal, bolster damage or affect the mood of others, that add an enthralling intricacy to the core loop of play. There is a greater level of strategy that compensates for the lack of visceral action. Even at its simplest, when done right, a turn-based RPG with 4 party characters can be equally as engaging as something like Helldivers 2. Now, why have I spent the last couple of minutes on this tangent? What's the relation to Felvidek? Well, dear viewer, The tragedy of this section is that I think Felvidek serves as an example of the first time a turn-based RPG has left me pretty fucking bored. When first going into Felvidek, I thought it started off pretty strong. Pavol serves as your main damage dealer while Matej works as the party healer. It's not uncommon for turn-based RPGs to start you off with only 2 characters and eventually get you up to 4. But as time went on, I began to realise that Pavol and Matej really are the only people you get to use, right up until what is the last act of the game, when Pavol's friend Adam and a mercenary called Kandik join you. So, from the start of the game until practically the end of it, you only have 2 party members. This decision did not bode well for the rest of the design. You see, because you only get Pavol and Matej through a lot of Felvidek's runtime, the developers acknowledged that it would likely put the player at a disadvantage when facing larger groups of adversaries at regular intervals. These enemies can stun your characters and make them lose a turn. With Pavol being focused on damage and Matej being focused on healing, either of them getting stunned could start a snowball and spell the end for the player. So to compensate, both characters are practically the same in terms of combat. Barring Matej's one healing move, he attacks in the same manner as Pavol with a similar stat line. And because of how the tools resource works, namely that it can only be replenished outside of battle until you get some rare items towards the end of Felvidek, it means that this one move that distinguishes Matej from Pavol can't really be used more than once. The game takes a focus on item usage as a way to provide more interesting utility without the trouble of balancing a level system. And it does work for the most part, but as a consequence, it means that both Pavol and Matej are equally as capable of healing as they are doing damage. In terms of gameplay, the wayfaring drunkard knight serves exactly the same purpose as the devoted priest. And this lack of specific identity in combat only gets worse when, because of the limited tools resource, there is only one effective approach to playing. You shield bash to stun your opponent, you then half sword the stunned opponent to break their armor, and then you spam the attack button until they fall over. And, most cruelly, the game almost teases you with the prospect of a full party. Early on you encounter a local drunkard called Numbnut, who joins your team after beating him in a fight. Of course, moments later he falls in a river, and due to the layout of the overworld map, there is no way to get back to the castle without using a bridge.
Falling off my fucking... What's going on? What?
You get robbed at one point in the game, and the thief in question joins you to fight some monsters when they break into their den, then, immediately after, leaves your group. Sometimes 2 random soldiers will be assigned to your party for one specific battle and then be sent away. It seems that, for some fights, the developers acknowledged the possibility the player wouldn't be capable of beating the fight with just Pavol and Matej, and would need some assistance. Yet this whole problem could be circumvented by, towards the beginning of the game, just making Adam and Kandik already part of your party. Adam being away fighting the Ottomans and Kandik being a mercenary you have to save in a town to recruit him are needless and irrelevant contributions to an already wobbly story. Not only would their continued presence let the developers flesh out each of them into specialized roles that give them presence in the part of Felvidek that matters most, but also would give us as the audience more time to understand them as story characters and potentially involve us more. The most Adam meant to me when he turned up almost at the end of the game was that he had a gun during combat. The lack of potency in the story means I could only ever value the individual characters for their utility, but even by the end of the game, they all served exactly the same purpose. This means that, as a result of a combination of design choices stemming from the decision to only let us use 2 constant party members, there is little fun to be had at all. No leveling up means no stat lines to manage, and the individual gear items giving you specific moves instead, while a neat idea, eventually means everyone has the same moves, because you'll have enough money at the end of the game to get them all the best gear, which comes down to a few identical armor pieces and weapons. There is also little incentive during the fleeting moments where you have Adam and Kandik to give them the best stuff, because, as the game has established for most of its runtime, anyone outside of Matej and Pavol are typically brief interlopers. Even during the part where I'm meant to have a full party, I never truly felt like I had one, because all I had been taught to do was value the 2 characters I knew would always be around. With all of this in mind, it actually baffles me a little that praises have been sung so confidently. Felvidek's animation work is a neat touch, and the use it makes of a simple engine like RPG Maker is inspiring for aspiring game developers, but beyond the basic essentials, there's not much to write home about. A video on Felvidek seemed impossible for me to do for some time because I felt I didn't really know what to say about it. It's just kind of there. Even with considerations given for the scope of a project and tempering my expectations accordingly, I walked away from it feeling thoroughly underwhelmed. Perhaps it's because there aren't really many RPG games that attempt to realistically depict a 15th century setting that makes people like it so much, and I agree, it is consistent in its realistic depiction throughout, but if anything, this choice sours my feelings more. For such an underrepresented time period that has a lot of potential for telling a story with the unique language choices the team selected, it's a shame Felvidek isn't something more. That there wasn't more weight to the spiritual and demonic parts of the story that, if done right, may have made Pavol and Matej more endearing as protagonists in the understandable fear and uncertainty they felt, that there wasn't the inclusion of a complete party, and that its absence led to a major design oversight that oversimplified the already simple core tenets of a fun turn-based RPG. The presentation of Felvidek is its strongest quality, and I think the creative ethos behind the game is commendable for how dedicated the creators are to the vision that best tells the story they wanted to tell. Felvidek is a serviceable game that has some nice comedic moments, namely those that are pre-rendered in cutscenes, and I don't at all contend with the notion that it's an overall positive experience. To that end, I don't agree that Felvidek is anything more than decent, and it's a sincere belief of mine that there is a lot of room for improvement which, hopefully, the developers will act upon for their next work. This is why Felvidek could have been a lot better. You're probably wondering how I'm going to end off this video considering my current position. Don't worry, this video is pre-recorded, and by the time you've finished it, I'm already gone.